So, good afternoon, everyone. We are the group 4 and we are tasked to report about the information processing theory. So, the objectives are at the end of this lesson, the learner should be able to describe the process involved in acquiring, storing, and retrieving knowledge. Also, cite educational applications of the theory in information processing. So let's go to the first one, information processing. It is a cognitive theoretical framework that focuses on how knowledge enters and is stored in as retrieved from our memory. It is one of the most significant cognitive theories in the last century, and it has strong implications on the teaching learning process. So in other words, information processing theory is designed to study how humans learn and remember. It developed enough to provide teachers with suggestions for improving the teaching learning process. So the types of knowledge are general versus specific, declarative, procedural, episodic, and conditional. And there are three stages: the storage, retrieval, and executive control processes. So IPT describes how the learner receives information or stimuli from the environment through the senses, and what takes place in between determines whether the information will continue to pass through the sensory register in the short-term memory and the long-term memory. So there are cognitive psychologists that believe they consider learning as largely an internal process, not an external behavior change. So they look into how we receive, perceive, store, and retrieve information. They also believe that how a person thinks about and interprets what she or he receive shape what she or he will learn. So all these notions comprises what is called IPT, or information processing theory. So let's go to the first one. The types of knowledge are general versus specific. So it involves whether the knowledge is useful in many tasks or in only one. So general knowledge is knowledge that is easy to communicate, as it is often just the overview of a topic. So whereas specific knowledge is more narrow and detailed, thus it is more difficult to communicate. So usually people only contain specific knowledge in a few areas, though could have more general knowledge on a wide range of subjects. So some information is difficult to communicate. Why? Because people have cognitive limitation. So we cannot get all possible information in our head. So moreover, it takes time to attain knowledge. So the limitations on the cognitive capacity of humans makes it or even impossible to transfer large amount of information from one person to another. So let's take for example, you are a football coach. So you have a general knowledge regarding the team as a whole. While we are talking about specific knowledge, you could be a defense coach working with defenders teaching specific skills. So this is because they know how the specific knowledge are also talking about their area or their field of specific knowledge. So when you say specific of knowledge, that is it is a lot of, it is particular to an environment. So the people who work in that environment knows best what is important. So for instance, the salespeople interact a lot with the firm's customer, and as a consequences, they know a lot about the preferences of a customer. So similarly, the production team knows the production very well. They will be able to identify possible improvement in the production process. So let's go to the second, declarative. This refers to factual knowledge, or they relate to the nature of how things are. They may be in the form or a word or an image. So it is also called explicit knowledge. So meaning that you are consciously aware that you understand the information. So it refers to facts or information stored in the memory that is considered static in nature. So declarative knowledge, also referred to as conceptual, propositional, or descriptive knowledge. It describes things, events, or processes. So there are attributes are the relation to each other. So for example, you know your name, address, nursery rhyme, the definition of IPT, or even the face of your crush. So we have this called declarative memory. So it is referred to as explicit memory of facts, data, and events. So for example, let's say that you know that your favorite restaurant is only open until 6 p.m. on Sunday. Then the time that the restaurant is closed is considered declarative memory, meaning we are consciously aware of the information, or the information that we recall, that is considered declarative memory. So let's go to the procedural. This includes the knowledge on how to do things. So it is also called imperative knowledge. It is the knowledge that exercise the performance of some task. So it is knowing how to do something. Think of the word procedural. Diba? Its root is procedure, so which is an action word. So some examples of procedural knowledge are how to drive a car. And in a charades game, you must act out in the actions of what you are trying to get your partner to guess. So acting out is a visual demonstration and a great way to show procedural knowledge. So once the procedural knowledge is gained, it becomes implicit, which means that you are no longer consciously aware of the knowledge. So let's go to the class. So let's explain the declarative knowledge. So a declarative knowledge is answers the questions, what do you know? So it is your understanding of things, ideas, or concepts. So in other words, the declarative knowledge can be thought of as the who, what, when, and where of information. So declarative knowledge is normally discussed using nouns like names of people, places, or things or dates that events occurred. So the procedural knowledge are answer the questions, what can you do? So while declarative knowledge is demonstrated using nouns, procedural knowledge really relies on action words or verbs. So it is a person's ability to carry out actions to complete a task. So let's go to the episodic. The episodic is this includes memories of life events. So memories of events that had already happened or that have already happened. So episodic memory can be used for inference and learning procedural and declarative knowledge. So a past event is episodic memory is experience. So episodic memory is a person's unique memory of a specific event. So it will be difficult from someone else's recollection of the same experience. So episodic memory is a category of a long-term memory that involves the recollection of specific events, situations, and experiences. So for example, your first day of school, the first date, you're attending a friend's birthday party, your brother's graduation are all examples of episodic memory. So the last one is conditional. This is about knowing when and why to apply declarative or procedural strategies. So conditional are involves having skills that are relevant in determining context and conditions under which in the correct use of declarative and procedural knowledge are applicable in any learning environment. So if declarative knowledge accounts for knowing what and procedural knowledge accounts for knowing how, then conditional knowledge accounts for knowing when. It is the ability of recognizing when and why specific cognitive intervention should be applied. So the stages in the information processing theory are encoding, storage, and retrieval. So the encoding are information is sensed, perceived, and attended to. So encoding is we get information into our brains through a process called encoding. So which is the input of information into the memory system. So once we receive sensory information from the environment, our brains labeled or code it. So we organize the information with other similar information and connect new concepts to existing concepts. So encoding information occurs through both automatic processing and effortful processing. So for example, if someone asks you what you ate for lunch today, so more than likely you could recall this information quite easily. So this is known as in automatic processing or the encoding details like time, space, frequency, and the meaning of words. The automatic processing is usually done without any conscious awareness. So the storage are the information is stored for either a brief or extended period of time depending upon the process following encoding. So storage are once the information has been encoded, we have to retain it or our brains take the encoded information and place it in a storage area. So storage is the creation of permanent record of information. So in order for a memory to go to storage, they must pass through distinct stages like sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So the retrieval refers to getting information out of storage. So if we can't remember something, it may be because we are unable to retrieve it. So when we are affected to retrieve something from memory, the differences between short-term memory and long-term memory becomes very clear. So the stages in the IPT. So most theories of information processing revolve around the three main stages in the memory process. So let's go to sensory register. So sensory register. So the first step in the IP model holds all sensor information for a very brief time. So the capacity our mind receives a great amount of information, but it is more than what our minds can hold or perceive. The duration is the sensory register only holds the information for an extremely brief period in the order 1 to 3 seconds. So there is a difference in a duration based on modality. So the auditory memory is more persistent than visual. So sensory gesture, it is very brief storage up to a couple of seconds. So we are constantly bombarded with sensory information. So we cannot absorb all of it or even most of it, and most of it has no impact in our lives. So for example, what was the color of your t-shirt? So can you recall that? Or what was your professor wearing last class period? So as long as the professor was dressed appropriately, it does not really matter what they were wearing. So sensor information is also about um, sounds, smells, and even textures which we do not view as a valuable information. So that's why we discard or ignore it. So if we view as valuable, then the information will move into our short-term memory system. So the role of attention. So getting through this attention filter is done when the learner is interested in the material, when there is conscious control over attention, or when information involves novelty, surprise, salience, and distinctiveness. Then the before information is perceived it is known as pre-categorical information. So this means that until the point the learner has not established a determination of the categorical membership of the information. So the role of attention is their goal is to bring information into consciousness. It is necessary that we give attention to it, such that we can only perceive or remember later those things that pass through our attention gate. So the short-term memory or the capacity are 5 to 99 chunks of information, sometimes described as positive 7 and negative 2. It is called working memory because it is where new information is temporarily placed while it is mentally processed. The durations are around 18 seconds or less. It is to reduce the loss of information in 18 seconds, you need to do maintenance rehearsal. It is using repetition to keep the information active in short-term memory, like when you repeat a phone number just given over and over. So short-term memory is sensory memories transferred into working memory will last 15 to 20 seconds with a capacity of 5 to 99 chunks of information. So information is maintained in working memory through maintenance or elaborative rehearsal. So when you say maintenance, it refers to repetition. So when you say elaboration, it refers to the organization of information. So the processing that occurs in working memory is affected by a number of factors. Firstly, individuals have varying levels of cognitive load or the amount of mental effort they can engage in at a given moment. So due to individual characteristics and intellectual capacities, so secondly, information that has been repeated many times becomes automatic and does not require much cognitive resources. So lastly, according to the task at hand, individuals use selective processing to focus attention on information that is highly relevant and necessary. So the long-term memory is the final permanent storehouse for memory information. It holds the stored information until needed again. So the capacity is unlimited and the duration is indefinite. So long-term memory includes various types of information like declarative and procedural. So as opposed to the previous memory constructs, long-term memory has unlimited space. So the crucial factor of long-term memory is how well organized information is. So this is affected by proper encoding or the elaboration process in transferring to long-term memory, and retrieval process as scanning memory for the information and transferring into working memory so that it could be used. So as emphasized in Bransford's work, the degree of similarity between the way information was encoded and the way it is being assessed will shape the quality of retrieval process. So in general, we remember a lot less information than is actually stored there.
Yes, okay. So Fab already discussed about the stages in the information processing theory and the sensory register, including the role of attention, short-term memory, and the long-term memory. Now let's move on with executive control processes. What is executive control process? It involves the executive processor, or what is referred to as metacognitive skills. These processes guide the flow of information through the system, help the learner make informed about how to categorize, organize, or interpret information. Examples of these processes are attention, rehearsals, and organization. Next, forgetting. We have here, we will be under this forgetting, we will talk about the method, different methods for increasing retrieval of information. Forgetting, it is the inability to receive or access information when needed. So, sa ato sa Bisaya pa ni, forgetting kay kanang malimuta, ng pagkakalimtano na to. So, there are two main ways in which forgetting likely occurs. First, the decay, and the second, kay interference. So, decay takes place when information is not attended to and eventually fades away. It is very prevalent in working memory or the short-term memory. As I've said earlier nga, if ang information is not attended to, it will fade away. It will eventually fade away. Next is the interference. New or old information blocks access to the information in question. Whether either of the two types of information, the new or the old information, they access information in question, in a question. Next, we are going to deal with the methods for increasing retrieval of information. There are many ways here, many methods. For instance, the rehearsal, and then there's next part. So first, let's discuss what is rehearsal. I'm sure most of us have tried to do this. We have while learning, we have undergone these types of methods. We've experienced these methods, only that we still don't know its classification or how do we call them. So this time we are going to find out what are those. So rehearsal, this is repeating information verbatim, either mentally or aloud. So for instance, kanang number, or let's say kanang sugon ka og tambal, nak palit sa didog silicylic acid. Unsa to'y tawag ma? So magsige ka para dili ka malimot, like you keep maintaining that information in your mind. So that's called rehearsal. Like while naglakaw ka padulong sa store, ang sige nimo balik-balik is salicylic acid. So that's it. And then meaningful learning. Meaningful learning is making connections between new information and prior knowledge. This is different from organization, though quite similar, but it's not really the same. So organization is making connections among various pieces of information. Information that is organized efficiently should be recalled. While meaningful learning talks about your prior knowledge and new information, organization refers to making connections among various pieces of information. So like there's a thin line between them, no? So we cannot interchange them though. For example, in meaningful learning, like your knowledge in biology, for example, that could be used, the basic knowledge or your basic foundations, knowledge in biology. You can use example about specifically heredity, genetics and heredity. So you can use that when you dig deeper to it when you're in grade 10. So your foundation, your knowledge about the genetics and heredity in grade 8, you could use that as that's your prior knowledge, and your new information will be that when you dig deeper when you're in grade 10. So in organization, it is kanang when you associate knowledge, for instance, the different time signatures in music and fractions in math, or sort of like those things. Next, elaboration. This is adding additional ideas to new information based on what you already know. So it is connecting new information with old gain meaning. Like when you've given for instance definition, and then you are going to elaborate, you're going to expound, you're going to add additional ideas, of course, related to that definition. So that's elaboration. And in that way, there would be retrieval of information. That, of course. Next, Next, visual imaginary. This means forming a picture of the information. Like, if you are memorizing something, like if you are memorizing ingredients of when you are memorizing ingredients, for you to keep that in mind, I believe you are going to form a picture in your mind. So when your mom sugoon kaniya og palit og kalamay og asin og kanang mantika, imong hunahunahon kay if nana ka sa store, and then you're like sort of forgetting things, so maka-forget ka, like maghunaw na ka, sakto wala na isulod tong kuan, hurot na tong sulod sa sulod dag mantika, sakto hurot na tong asin. So that's it, information kanang ma-recall nimo siya nga. So those are gisugot ni mama nako. Next, generation. Things we produce are easier to remember than things we hear. That's why kanang it is connected, like katong sa research, according to research nga, mostly experiences or our hands-on experiences are more unforgettable rather than those informations that we only hear. So for instance, sa computer lab class, it's different when you're performing sa computer than when your teacher, like it's different when ikaw mismo kay hanang nag-explore unsa nang mga bar, mga icons, ikaw na mismo ang explore sa different functions, like sa toolbar, sa ingana, than mag-lecture si teacher about ingana. It's really different. Next, personalization. It is making the information relevant to the individual. It's kanang when you are kanang presented, a fact is presented in front of you, and then you personalize it. You connect it with your personal experiences, your personal life, like you connect the lesson with your life or with your life situations. That's personalization. Other than that, there are also other memory methods. So, for instance, first, the serial position effect, or the recency and primacy. You will remember the beginning and end of a list more readily. For instance, again, when we are told to memorize the physical education objectives, we can what's in our mind is this: the first word of a sentence and then the last. So we usually don't kanang ma-memorize jud kanang word for word, but what is certain is the first word, the first and the last will will be more likely to be correct. So, like, ang in, of, the, or kana magkabalista sa tunga, but ang first ug ang end, they are more likely to be correct. Part learning is breaking up the list or chunk information to increase memorization. It's like, if na kay usa ka complex or compound sentence, example ana is, imo siyang bahin-bahinon by thought. Pwede nimo siya bahin-bahinon by part or by by chunk, or imo siyang by thought. So pwede ka moingon dito nga, for instance katong sa fitness, 45 fitness programs. Sunod for basic, advanced, and specialized physical education. So like, imong mind kay imong bahin-bahinon sa imong mind ang different parts for kanang dali ra gali ma-retrieval of information, dali ra ma-recall, dali ra nimo ma-memorize. Next, distributed practice. Break up learning sessions rather than cramming all the information in at once. So, I've done this kanang when we are told also to memorize the vision, mission, quality policy, goals, objectives. I've done this. Like, for this day, I'll do the mission, vision, and the next day, I'll do the mission, vision with quality policy, and then the fourth day, I will do the mission, vision, quality policy, goals, and then the next day, until I can memorize everything. So, especially if kanang purog memorization like me, so struggle na ko siya. So I cannot do cramming. I cannot dili ko pwede mag-cramming if mag-memorize kay doesn't work for me. So I really need time pag abot sa memorization. Mnemonic aids. These are memory. I'm sorry, this is a typographical error. This national space. So these are memory techniques that learners may employ to help them retain and retrieve information more effectively. This includes the Lucci techniques, acronyms, among others. So, mnemonic aids, it is very common. For instance, when I learned guitar, I've had a hard time memorizing the E, A, B, D, E, A, D, G, B, E. Yeah, the string. So, I've used mnemonic aid. So, E for it, A for another, D for donut, G for get, B for B. So, instead of directly memorizing the EAB, which is very makalibog for me, I've used mnemonic aid. So, it's like this: eat another donut, get bigger every time. So it's easy na. E, A, D, G, B, E. That's it. So I hope everything is clear now. We have a summary here. Information is received through the senses and goes to the sensory memory for a very brief amount of time. If not found relevant, information may decay. It goes to the STM, the short-term memory, and if given attention and is perceived and found to be relevant, it is sent to the long-term memory. If not properly encoded, forgetting occurs. Different cognitive processes applied to the information will then determine if information can be retrieved when needed later. Here's our internet sources. That's all for today. Thank you so much for paying attention.